In 1492, a queen signed the order that expelled 160,000 people from their homes. That same year, she funded a voyage that would colonize an entire hemisphere. That same year, she watched her inquisitors burn people alive in public squares. And she called all of it, every last piece of it, the work of God. That queen was Isabella I of Castile. And here is what they don't tell you. Before we move further, take 5 seconds to subscribe if you haven't already. It might be the best 5 seconds you spend today, because the stories we bring you don't just teach history, they change the way you see the world. She was never supposed to have power, at all. She was a girl, a spare, a bargaining chip, born third in line to a crumbling throne in 1451 in a kingdom so chaotic it was practically held together with rope. Her father died when she was 3. Her half-brother Henry took the throne and immediately forgot she existed, except when he needed to sell her to someone. She was 6 years old the first time a man tried to arrange her marriage. 6. And the groom was a grown man who needed an alliance more than he needed a bride. This is not a story about a saintly queen who did good things and bad things in equal measure. That's the version in the textbooks. This is the story of a woman so politically dangerous that the men around her spent 30 years trying to contain her and failed, completely, every single time. And what she did with that power, once she had it, is the part that should keep you up at night. Let's start at the very beginning of the part they leave out. When Isabella was 14, her brother Henry arranged for her to marry a 43-year-old nobleman named Pedro Girón. She had no say. No one asked. The deal was done, the man was already riding toward her, and according to accounts from the time, Isabella fell to her knees and prayed. Prayed so desperately, so specifically, that God would rather kill Pedro Girón than let her be handed over to him. Pedro Girón died on the road, just dropped dead mid-journey. Isabella stood up from her knees. She didn't say much. She had already learned at 14 that God and politics move in the same direction when you know how to push. By 18, she was moving the board herself. She chose Ferdinand of Aragon, her own choice, not Henry's, negotiated the marriage in complete secrecy, forged a papal dispensation they needed because they were second cousins, and smuggled Ferdinand into Castile disguised as a servant. They had never met. They were strangers. They married the day they laid eyes on each other, in October 1469, while Henry was in another city still believing Isabella would do as she was told. She never did as she was told. Not once. Not even once. Henry found out. He disinherited her. He sent spies. He plotted to abduct the newlyweds. He declared Isabella's marriage illegal and named his daughter Joanna his heir instead. And for the next 5 years, Isabella and Ferdinand were broke, hunted, and fighting a civil war with one hand while trying to hold their marriage together with the other. Here's the detail that doesn't make it into the romantic version. Isabella got pregnant almost immediately after the wedding, and she kept fighting anyway. She rode, she negotiated, she didn't retreat to safety. When Henry died in December 1474 and the throne came open, Isabella didn't wait for Ferdinand to come home. She didn't ask his permission. She didn't send a message. She crowned herself Queen of Castile without him, and Ferdinand found out from strangers days after it happened. He was furious. He raced home. They had one of the worst fights of their marriage, a screaming confrontation in which he announced he was going back to Aragon. She had humiliated him. She had stolen the most important moment of their reign and left him out of it entirely. He was done. And Isabella, this woman who had survived poisonings, who had forged papal documents, who had marched through war while pregnant, burst into tears. She begged him to stay. She told him she couldn't do it without him. She soothed his ego, reframed the situation, and talked him back from the door. She gave him the appearance of equal rule. She kept the actual power. That's who Isabella was. Not a saint, not a monster. Something much more difficult and much more dangerous. A politician of absolute genius who understood, with perfect clarity, that the world she lived in required her to be several different people at once, and that she could never afford to let anyone see which one was real. By 1478, she had pacified Castile, won the War of Succession, and started dismantling the institutional rot her brother had left behind. She reduced crime. She cleared the national debt. She created legal systems. She rode out personally, against her advisor's explicit instructions, to negotiate a rebellion in Segovia, a 25-year-old queen walking alone into a hostile city because she was confident, correctly, that her presence would end it. And then, that same year, she launched the Spanish Inquisition. Here's where it gets complicated. Here's where the story cracks open. Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, the name that still means cruelty in 6 languages, had been Isabella's personal confessor since she was a teenager. He knew her. He had guided her faith, shaped her conscience, and reportedly convinced her to marry Ferdinand in the first place. He was the closest thing she had to a spiritual father. And in 1483, she handed him the keys to the most feared institution in Europe and told him to purify Spain. The Inquisition's targets were conversos, Jews and Muslims who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of practicing their old faiths in secret. The methods were medieval in the worst sense: anonymous denunciations, secret trials, torture. And then, at intervals, the auto da fe, public burnings, carried out in town squares with crowds watching, sometimes with royalty in attendance, while Torquemada observed from a raised seat like it was theater. Between 1480 and 1498, conservative estimates put the number executed at somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000. Other historians believe it was higher. Isabella attended some of these events. She did not look away. And then came 1492, the year everything happened at once, the year that still sits at the center of history like a splinter. January, the last Muslim kingdom in Spain, Granada, fell to her armies after a decade of war. Isabella rode into the Alhambra Palace in full regalia, having personally managed much of the military supply line, having personally ridden to the front lines more than once. The Reconquista, the centuries-long Christian campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula, was complete. She had finished what it took her ancestors 700 years to begin. March. She signed the Alhambra Decree. Every Jew in Spain, 160,000 human beings who had lived there for 1,000 years, had 4 months to either convert to Christianity or leave forever. Everything they couldn't carry was forfeit: homes, businesses, communities, graves. Gone. April. Columbus sailed west. 3 events: 1 queen, 1 year. The founding of the Spanish Empire, the expulsion of an entire people, and the opening of a hemisphere to conquest that would eventually kill millions. And Isabella wrote at the time that she was doing God's work. That conviction, that absolute, unshakable certainty, was both her greatest strength and the thing that makes her genuinely terrifying. She was not a hypocrite who knew she was wrong. She was a true believer who was completely certain she was right. That's so much worse. The last decade of her life was a sequence of losses that would have broken anyone else. Her only son Juan died in 1497, barely months after his wedding. Her daughter Isabella, the eldest, died in childbirth the following year. By 1500, the heir to everything she had built was Joanna, her 3rd child, brilliant and passionate, and already showing signs of the instability that history would brand as madness. Whether Joanna was truly mad, or simply a woman who grieved too visibly and loved too intensely for a world that demanded queens perform composed indifference, historians still argue. What's not arguable is what Isabella saw when she looked at her daughter: the empire she had bled for, about to fall into hands she didn't trust. She spent her final years trying to legislate around it, arranging marriages, writing clauses, constructing legal frameworks that might hold the kingdom together after she was gone. And all while her own body failed her. A slow, grinding deterioration that began with high fevers and ended with swollen limbs, ulcers, and what contemporaries described as cancer. She died on November 26, 1504, She was 53. On her deathbed, she asked one thing of Ferdinand. One thing. Don't remarry. Don't have more children. Don't destabilize the succession. He promised. 2 years later, he married a 14-year-old French girl. The man she had loved and manipulated and forgiven and mourned for 35 years broke the last promise she ever asked him to keep, before her body was cold. Here is the question history keeps trying to answer and never quite managing. Was Isabella I great? By every measurable standard of her era, yes. She built a nation from broken pieces. She created legal institutions that outlasted her by centuries. She funded a voyage that changed the world's shape. She did it all while fighting her own husband, her own king, her own court, and the structural assumption that a woman's job was to hold still and be managed. But the fires were real. The expulsions were real. The 160,000 people walking out of their homes in the Spanish summer of 1492 were real. The screams in the Inquisition's dungeons were real. And she signed every order. She attended the ceremonies. She called it holy. The thing that makes Isabella I more dangerous than any king is not that she was cruel. Plenty of kings were cruel. It's that she was competent. It's that the cruelty was organized, systematic, backed by legal architecture and theological justification, and carried out by a woman so certain of her righteousness that when she finally made her list of sins in her last months, her long, quiet examination of everything she had done, she reportedly decided she had very little to repent. If you like this story, please like and share it. Subscribe for more videos, and don't forget to comment below. Who do you think was more dangerous, Isabella the Queen or Isabella the Believer? Let us know your thoughts.